Hi, I'm Carl Franklin. In this episode of Blazor Train, I've brought back Don from DevExpress to show off their Extreme Application Framework, or XAF. The elevator pitch is that XAF helps you build sophisticated Blazor applications in a very short amount of time. I really didn't know much about it until now, so let's just get started, shall we? XAF with Don Wibier is coming right up, right now, right here on Blazor Train. I'd like to welcome back to Blazor Train Don Wibier.
Hey, Carl.
Yeah, hey, Don. You're going to tell us all about XAF. And let me just tell you my limited understanding of XAF. I thought it was just an ORM, but there's a lot to it, isn't there? There's like code generation and a lot of, I guess you call it a low-code solution?
Well, you can do quite a bit of code, but XAF typically started with as part of our something that adds up on XPO. So we've got two things. XPO, which is our object relational mapping tool.
Oh, that's the ORM.
That's entity framework competition material, basically.
Right.
And then on top of that, we started quite some time ago with XAF, which is our Express Application Framework.
Okay.
And the whole idea behind it is that a lot of stuff that you always need to do all over again, like user management, views, edit screens, all that kind of stuff, that is all done for a lot of things are done for you. And obviously you need to do some coding as well if you want to do some custom actions, etc., etc. It's like a whole architecture for your application, basically.
All right, take it away.
All right, so before we get started, I have obviously started up Visual Studio, the latest version, in this case 2022, and I have downloaded and installed our universal package.
Yeah.
Because XAF is part of our universal license.
Okay.
And the reason for that is that it will pretty much use all of the stuff that we have. So from editors to ORM to data access libraries, all that kind of stuff, it is all being used in XAF.
Wow, cool.
So for that reason, you need a universal subscription.
Okay.
Once you have installed it on your local machine, you definitely need to install the package on your local machine, not use the NuGet packages, because there is some project templates and some helper stuff inside Visual Studio.
It's not just components.
It's a lot
bunch of
more,
software.
but you'll see that. Yeah. All right. So once we get started, we'll go to create a new project, and because I have installed this in Visual Studio, there is this DevExpress XAF template gallery.
Okay.
All right, so once we have hit the file new experience, we can configure the project, and I'll hit next on the first step. So here we enter the XAF Solution Wizard. So here we are with a couple of interesting options which are necessary for the XAF application. And in this case, we can pick whether we want to deploy a Windows Forms application and a web application which is running on Blazor server.
Neat. And
this is one of the things where XAF was built upon from the beginning. So you could have like a desktop application as well as a web forms application. But now we have changed the whole web forms part into Blazor because it makes more sense to replace that.
And just to reiterate, you can do both. You don't have to choose a desktop or a web. You can do both.
You can build both, yes. But since we're here on the Blazor train, we're just going to be talking about the Blazor version. Yeah?
All right, cool.
Cool. So we could also include end-to-end functional tests. We'll leave that out as well. We could do that some other time if people are interested, but let's just skip that part. Another very interesting question here is which ORM you want to use, because XAF works great with Entity Framework Core, and it will also work great with our own persistent objects, XPO.
Okay.
since we did some stuff with EF, I think 2 episodes back, we'll do XPO right now. And you'll see that it really doesn't make a lot of difference. Alright, the next step is an interesting one as well, because these days if you want to run a serious application with all kinds of sensitive information, you obviously want to have the authentication, and you have spent quite a bit of time on past episodes on that.
Yes.
Well,
yeah. On the .NET show, we just did a thing with MSAL.NET and against Azure AD B2C in a MAUI app. And it's not easy. There's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, we all know that. I mean, it's still a lot of work.
Yep.
But I can assure you with this, it's not really a lot of work. It's no work at all, basically.
Wow,
but you'll
cool.
see that. Then we come to a step where you can add a number of additional modules. And in this case, I mean, there is a whole bunch of them. So, for instance, if we want to do something with reporting, we can tick that box. We have a couple of additional options with the reporting, which you can turn on or off. I mean, we have some other stuff, and you can turn them on.
Does clone object mean that your business objects implement iClonable?
Yeah, something similar. Yeah, it allows you to copy like an object with like
Deep
child
copy
entities as well. Yeah,
nice.
Yeah. So yeah, we have turned a couple of options on, and we might get to that if we are not running out of time, but
okay.
I turn them on anyway. Alright, so with this I'm going to create the application, and it will take a couple of seconds before the application is being set up. So what we see here is we have 2 projects in the solution. One is the module folder, and this is typically the most important one. And then we have a Blazor server application.
Okay.
Right, so if we want to run this application, we can just hit the run button, and we'll see what it does. So what we'll see here is that the XAF application is booted up, and the first time it will take a bit longer, because what XPO does quite nice is it will actually create a database on the fly. It will also create the basic structure, and yeah, it will fully automatically initialize the database.
And is the database that you're talking about for the business objects, or for the authentication, or for both?
It's for both.
Wow, cool.
In this case, because I enabled that authentication, there is a default user which is called admin with no password. But this is
note to self,
right?
Change the password.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. It's
Publish.
one of our best practices. So once I'm logged on, we'll have the main UI of XAF.
Okay.
And what you'll see here is on the side, you'll have the users, you have the roles, you have my details, and this is obviously all done with Blazor Server. And the cool thing here is that you can create users.
Nice.
You can assign roles to them, as you can see here on the bottom side.
Yeah.
And this is pretty much all out of the box.
Wow.
So I can create a user here. There is not any roles like right now. Yeah, I can link them up. And this is also the main UI of XAF, basically. Obviously, now we want to have some data in the application as well. So we're going to use another thing to get that data.
Okay.
The last episode, you saw me using the scaffolding tools from EF. In this case, we have to deal with XPO because that was the option that I selected. So in this case, what I can do is XAF requires you to do all that kind of coding. So like the models and all the kind of stuff that needs to be in this modules folder. And then next into the business objects folder is where your entities should reside. Okay. So what we can do now is here I go to add new item, and we'll get one of the features here, which is the DevExpress ORM Data Modeling Wizard.
Nice.
And what will happen now is that we will get like a visual designer, which will still generate code like EF as well. In this case, we'll pop up a wizard that enables you to map to an existing database, create a new one, or do not connect to any database at all.
Okay.
In this case, I will pick the existing database, and this is obviously one of the cool things because we support a whole bunch of databases. You see that?
Right.
In this case, we'll leave it to MS SQL. It's gonna be my local DB, and you know what? I'm gonna pick the Chinook database again.
All right.
Because I guess that nobody has ever seen like a front end for the Chinook database, right? So we're gonna build that. I don't need to save the connection string to it because that's going to be done slightly different. And I can also, one of the things with XPO, we support stored procedures as well. And obviously we can use views as well, but I know that this database doesn't have any of them, so I can untick those boxes. I'll hit next, it will analyze the database, and we can select all or several entities and tables and fields, etc. In this case, we can create partial declarations for manual editing, which is kind of nice. And now the XPO scaffolding has been done.
Whoa, cool.
Here,
that looks familiar.
Yeah, here we have a nice diagram of the database.
Reminds me of Access or the SQL mapper.
Yeah. So here we can go to its properties. Let me see, because I need to check a couple of things on the model before we create all the classes here. So I don't want to have this in this particular scenario. Connection. And I will have the name Chinook. This is all good. And this is
field name prefix. Good.
Yeah, for the private members and stuff. All right, so as soon as I hit save, you'll see in the Solution Explorer that there is a whole bunch of classes being created, which are the entities for the Chinook database.
So this is creating entities. Is it also creating DTOs, data transfer object classes, or is that up to you?
You could do that, but not with XAF. It's not necessary. XAF has its own pattern behind it, its own architecture to deal with that.
So I'm guessing that on any properties, you can say whether or not to transfer them, whether or not to include them in the DTO.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, you can certainly do that. So here we have all those entities created, and well, I can show you one of them, but we won't go over them. So this is typically how an XPO class looks. Okay. Slightly different from EF, because EF uses plain objects, and we have a notification mechanism whenever some field changes, because that's where XCF relies on.
Right.
So that's all going to be, this is all standard XPO stuff. What is interesting, I forgot to turn it on. So, because if we now run the application, you'll see that nothing will be in there. Because we need to enable certain entities that we want to have in the menu. So, what I can do that in several ways. I can decorate this class with a navigation item property. And this comes with XAF. And I can turn the navigation to true. When I now run the application, what we see is a nice data grid with albums in this case, because that's what we added. And that is because I added this attribute navigation item here.
Right.
And now it's getting quite interesting, because once I click one of those items, what we'll see is that we have all the data that is inside this album, which is the title and the artist. And the artist is already mapped to the correct artist out of the database, because XAF is able to check the database model and creates these screens depending on the data in the database and the relationships. And not only that, there is also a relationship with tracks, what you see here.
Yeah.
And here are all the tracks on that album.
Nice.
And I can click on one of those tracks and I will get a pop-up. And did I mention this is all Blazor? It will now show all the details of that track.
Is this generated code, or is this that you can modify, or is this just in the can?
This is default behavior, but I'll show you a couple of things which makes it even cooler.
Okay.
Because when I get back to Visual Studio and I go back to the Solution Explorer, I mean, you saw me do this navigation item. I can do this by code, but there is also another way of doing this. And that is by going to this module designer.
Okay.
Once I double click this one, it will open up the model designer of this application. And this is something which is very powerful with XAF, because it combines this stuff that has been put in by code, and it will combine it with this model, which is a definition of your application. So what can we do here? Well, for instance, if I want to have more navigation items, what we'll see is that in this case, this is the album that it already found.
Right.
But maybe I want to change that name to albums. So what I'll do, I can now go to here and I'll just change this. I can also say, give me another one. For instance, give me, in this case, give me the invoice. I can pick an icon that I want to have associated with this, and this will show up our icon library.
Wow.
And we were dealing about invoices here, so this can be any icon, but we have something with financial, I guess. I'll do something like that. Maybe this one. Doesn't really matter. And next, we can also customize those views. So if I expand this views section, what we'll see is that we have the business objects of Chinook, because that was the data model I'm dealing with. And now I can, for instance, say I want to go to the album list view, and I want to make some changes to the behavior of this thing as well.
Wow.
And so, for instance, maybe I want to go a bit deeper and want to get rid of a column by default, or change this column title. It should be an artist, not an artist ID. It is the album list view. So the album detail view, I can do the same.
Okay.
And we can set some more options. And before we run the application, let me make sure that the item that I put in here, that was the invoice one, should be visible. And I'll do it like this. So yeah, what you'll see is that also with the invoice list view, let me see if that's enabled.
Neat. So you're basically setting up what can be viewed in a quick view. I saw that. But you're just basically turning switches on and off to and changing strings and things to customize the behavior and appearance of your app.
Exactly. Yeah, so you also now understand that we are able with this approach to deploy like the Windows desktop application.
Right.
As well as the Blazor front end. So once we're back in the application, what you'll see is that we now have an invoice item in the navigation as well. You see, that's because we enabled that in the model designer.
Right.
And again, because XAF is aware of the data module and the relationships between entities, what you'll see is that we have a customer which is shown as a real customer and not as an ID. We have invoice items in this case, and we are also able to summarize those items by specifying some settings in the model designer.
Wow.
And what's even cooler is talking about security. So that is set up quite simple as well. So for instance, if I want to create a new role,
right?
Let's create a new role. And this role is non-financial. It is not an administrator and it can't do anything.
Right.
In this case, I will set up a navigation permission here. Let me first save this one to make sure it's there. And I'll put in a new navigation permission. In this case, I will pick my invoice.
Right.
And I will say
deny.
And, well, since you are the musician and not the finance guy, right?
You know the difference between a musician and a mutual fund?
No.
One matures and earns money.
yeah, the other one spends. So I put you already in. Here is your account. It's active. I'm gonna assign I'm gonna link an existing role to it.
Okay.
Which is the non-financial role. I'll give you the default as well. There might be some other stuff in there, but anyway. So in this case, you're in these roles.
Now this is general identity stuff, but if there was a conflict between these two roles, like let's say default allowed access to navigate the invoice and non-financial didn't, and I belong to both roles, does the allow or the deny take precedence?
I think by default the deny takes priority, but
that would make sense.
I'm pretty sure this can be changed as well in the behavior of the application.
Okay.
So now let's change over to you, not like in the train, but in the app. And I did put a very strong password in, as you saw.
Yep.
And yeah, it's gone. You see?
Right. Yep.
So this is how easy you can actually set up complicated things that are just a lot of work to do in an application. And this is all out of the box.
So I think this is a great introduction to XAF and the Express application framework. You guys have a lot of training and stuff online where people can go to learn more, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And this, as you mentioned, it's just like a little touch on XAF. There is so much stuff available. There's also a ton of videos. There is a ton of documentation available. And you should definitely, if you're interested in this kind of application development, which certainly saves time, I would absolutely check that out, because this is just a small little appetizer. I mean,
it really, really looks great. And, you know, what's awesome is because it uses Blazor.
Of course.
You know, you don't end up with stuff that's spread across so many files and directories and, you know, decomposed to death. It looks really good.
And it has all the bells and whistles that you will need for most line of business applications. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you, Don.
You're welcome.
Now back to you in the studio, Carl. I hope you enjoyed these last two episodes focused on DevExpress tools. Now I suppose I'll get off the express train and back onto the local. And you know what that means. Take heavy drugs and go to sleep in the quiet car. Makes the time pass more quickly. Hey, thanks for riding the rails with me today. This is where I jump off. I'll see you next time. Blazor Train!